Hello, this is Richard White and welcome to this mini course on advanced questioning skills for sales. The purpose of this mini course is to take the learning of questioning beyond the difference between closed and open questions and really look at how questions are used within the sales process. And we're also going to be looking at the different types of open questions and their use, and also how you use closed questions for the purpose of closing. If you look at the sales process and the various stages of the sales process, you may be forgiven for thinking that questioning is really about the discovery phase. But actually questions are used at each stage of the sales process. They're just used in different ways. It's a popular misconception to think that selling is all about having the gift of the gab, to be able to talk and persuade the other person. Well, selling is really all about questioning and listening, finding out what the customer wants to buy and then selling it to them. If all you're doing is talking, you lose control of the sales situation. The person asking the questions is the person in control. That needs to be you. Let's look at another popular misconception: always be closing. Rather than always be closing the sale, I like to think of this as always be closing the stage of the sales process. The objective of each stage of the sales process is to move to the next stage. In order to do the sale justice, you need to take it through each stage of your sales process. If you're at generate interest stage, you need to move it to qualify interest, then on to discovery, then on to propose, then on to negotiate, and then on to close. So know where you are in the sales process and then use questioning to get yourself to the next stage. So let's have a quick look at the purpose of questions in the sales process. There are two purposes. The first purpose is to gather information and also to help the prospect think through the issues in relation to making the decision. The second purpose is to make a decision. So the first purpose is covered by open questions. That's about gathering information and helping to think through the issue. The second purpose is covered by closed questions, which are all about making a decision. Ultimately in sales, we're looking for a decision of yes or no. Preferably yes, of course, but we need to have a decision. And it's the decision maker that ultimately makes the decision, and it's our job as a salesperson to help them in the making of the decision. In asking good open questions, we can extract the right sort of information they need in order to make a compelling business case. And then with the right closed questions, we can get them to make a decision. Because no decision is worse than a no decision. There's all sorts of information that as a salesperson we want to know. For example, what's motivated them to express an interest? What are their current circumstances? Do they have funds available? What sort of information do we need to propose a solution? If we just steam in and talk, then how will we ever find out this sort of information that's going to enable us to make a compelling proposal? At each stage of this sales process, we need to be clear as to what our ideal outcome is in order to get to the next stage of the sales process. This will then tell us what information we need, and then that will help us to decide what questions we need to ask. Now, of course, you can't plan all of your questions, but I think you do need to be clear about some of your key questions you need to be asking. Open questions get their name from the fact that the answer is open-ended. We don't know exactly what the prospect is going to tell us when we ask an open question. But that's the point. We want to find out what is on the prospect's mind. Even if we've had a good guess, we still want them to say the words. Because until they've passed their lips, we don't know if it's actually true. We're just assuming it's true. So let's look at the various types of open question and their purpose. A who question will give you identity information. For example, who's in charge of this project? A why question will give you information about reasons. For example, why did you set the project up in this way? A where question will give you information about location. For example, where is the project office going to be located? When questions will give you information about timing. For example, when do you plan to start the project? How questions give us information about process or method. For example, how do you intend to get this project off the ground? The last type of question is what, and what is a very clean question. It can be used to gather almost any type of information if used correctly. For example, instead of asking somebody why they did something, you can ask them what led them to do that thing. Instead of asking someone how to do something, you could ask them what steps are required. So really, what is a neutral question that gives us a lot of flexibility in asking more direct questions. I'm not suggesting that you only ask what questions. What I am suggesting is that if you're struggling to find the right question, then you might want to use what to begin your question. After we've asked a question and our prospect starts to reply, they may be giving us the right amount of information, or maybe we want more detail, or maybe we want less detail. So what we're going to look at now is how to control the amount of information you get back from your prospect. So let's say that you have a prospect, you've asked them a question, and the answer is very vague. You would just ask a follow-on question and insert the word specifically after the first word of the question. So for example, how specifically would that work? When specifically is that going to happen? Who specifically should I be speaking to? And an alternative to specifically is the word exactly. So for example, where exactly will we be meeting? Obviously you don't want to be using the word specifically or exactly in every single question, but if you do need more detail, then it's a very helpful addition to the question. If you want to take the conversation up to a much higher level, then you need to preface your question with some sort of instruction. So for example, looking at the bigger picture, what are you hoping to achieve by all of this? The statement immediately before the question directs which way you want the conversation to go. And remember, it's you that's in control of the conversation. The purpose of asking good open questions is to get information, and you need to make sure that you're actually listening to the answers, rather than just waiting for them to say the magic words before you launch into a sales pitch. And the information that's given back to you will not just be in the words that are spoken, but also the body language. By body language, we're talking about the tone of the voice, we're talking about the facial expressions, we're talking about the posture and the way that they're sitting. Body language is always important, but the change in body language is even more important. For example, if your prospect has been fairly relaxed and all of a sudden they start to get all serious, that's information. If your prospect has been looking fairly open-minded and all of a sudden they start looking skeptical, then that's information. And if your prospect starts becoming a little defensive, that's really worth knowing. And I find the best way to deal with this is to actually bring it out into the open. Say something like, I sense you're not quite happy with this, or I notice you look a little skeptical. It's best to bring it out in the open. If you let it pass, then you may miss some vital information. So far we've dealt with open questions, which are really about asking for information. Closed questions, on the other hand, allow us to get a decision and close down the conversation. With closed questions, there are a limited number of possible answers, and it's normally yes or no. But a closed question can also be a choice of two options. For example, when would you like to meet, Tuesday or Thursday? Do you see us starting before the summer holiday or afterwards? You'll see in these two cases that we haven't given them a choice of yes or no, but a choice of two options, both of which give us what we want. A meeting or an indication that they're going to be starting with us. When we give the prospect two options like this, it's called an alternative close. And remember, closing is not just about at the end of the sale, we're closing each stage of the sales process. So if you're looking to get a meeting, then giving two alternative dates is a good way of closing down that part of the sales process. And what will happen is they will either choose one of the two dates, or they'll give you an alternative date, or come up with some form of objection. Either way, you've started to close down that part of the sales process, ready to move on to the next stage. Obviously, it's a judgment call as to when the time is right to close, but remember, always be closing. One of the things you need to be doing when the prospect is giving you information is every so often summarizing what you've heard and then confirming that your understanding is correct. And the confirmation is done with a closed question. So you'd say something like, let me just check that I've correctly understood you. Then you'd replay what you've understood in your own words and then ask whether or not that's correct. The prospect will either say yes or they'll say no and correct you. Either way, you're one stage closer to the close because you don't need to go over that ground again. And if a prospect throws up an objection in the future that contradicts something you've confirmed, then the fact that you have confirmed it will help you in handling that objection. And in your advanced planning, it will be good to work out what are the key pieces of information you need to discover and to confirm, rather than just leave it to chance. So as we can see here, there are three main reasons for using closed questions. Firstly, to confirm your understanding about what your prospect has told you. Secondly, to arrange an appointment. And thirdly, in closing down one stage of the sales process before moving on to the next, which ultimately means closing the sale at the end of the sales process. As you can see from this list, there are lots of ways to preface a closed question, where the answer is going to be yes or no. For example, would you like to meet to discuss this opportunity? If you give someone the option of yes or no, the chances are they'll go for no, because it's an easy option. That's why giving a choice of two alternatives is a much better way of controlling the answer. You've gathered all the necessary information, you've summarized and confirmed it, and you've made a compelling presentation based on all the information you've gathered. Then in most cases you just need a closed question in order to get a decision. For example, from everything you've said so far, it looks like there's a really good fit. Shall we go ahead? Or, from what you've told us, I really think that we can help you make a lot of savings. On the basis we've discussed, are you okay to proceed? If you're not quite sure if they're going to say yes, then you may want to try something like the assumptive close. This involves discussing some details as if they had already agreed to go ahead. So you're acting as if they've already said yes. Then after you've been speaking for a while, you ask if it makes sense to get the paperwork out of the way before you move forward. It's a softer close because if the prospect really wants to deal with you, then he'll continue discussing the details. But if they don't, then they'll quickly raise an objection. It's for this reason that a technique like this is sometimes referred to as a trial close, because you can use it to see whether the prospect is ready for the close. You'll notice though that we still ended up asking a yes-no question, but only after we've had a discussion assuming that they're going to go ahead. So to summarize, open questions are really about gathering information, closed questions are more for getting decisions. And at each stage in the sales process, we're probably going to be asking both open questions and closed questions. The outcome for each of the stages of a sales process is to get successfully to the next stage. And we really need to be planning out what information we need to be gathering, and from there what questions we need to ask. The chances are that there'll be certain questions that you use again and again and again, and so it's worth memorizing them so that you don't have to think about them. In terms of what to do next, I really recommend you become a student of questions and you start to notice other people's questioning skills and your own questioning skills as well. You'll only get to mastery by continually practicing and also getting some feedback from your sales manager or sales coach. So I hope you found this useful. My name's Richard White and I hope to see you soon.